And now on the line is Laura Broxson, spokesperson of the National Animal Rights Association, or NARA. Laura, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me on.
I interviewed you for the first time on Near FM around a year and a half ago, Laura, and today is only our second interview. I got in touch with you because you were quoted in a recent article on the journal.ie about the horse racing industry in Ireland. Before we talk about the horse racing industry specifically, Laura, as this is our first interview in a year and a half, could you remind our listeners today on Near FM, for those who don't know, about who NARA are and what makes you different from the couple of other national animal rights associations we have in the country?
Yes, of course. We were founded in 2007. We're a vegan, voluntary, non-hierarchical campaign group, and we focus on pressure campaigns, which means we focus on one issue at a time until we achieve our goals. So, for example, our biggest campaign to date was the successful ban on fur farming, and at the moment we're working on a ban on hair coursing. So we engage in protests, leafleting sessions, outreach events, information stalls, door-to-door letter drops and letter writing campaigns. So we come at our targets from every kind of angle. And we usually get a fair bit of political support from the likes of the Socialist Party, People Before Profit, who put forward these bills and bring our campaigns to a legislative sort of a level. So that's how we work. We're mainly operating from Dublin, but we do travel the country. In fact, we travel to a different location at least once a week to do outreach events. So if anyone wants to get involved, get in touch.
Okay, to move on to why we're doing this interview, Laura, could you tell our listeners today on Near FM, for those who don't know, about what the recent article on the journal.ie was all about?
Yeah, absolutely. It was figures obtained under a parliamentary question by TD Paul Murphy on the figures of racehorses slaughtered in Ireland since 2020, and that figure was 3,000. So every year there'd be, on average, at least 500-600, but it seems to have increased a lot in the last 2 years. And these are horses that are thoroughbreds that would have been used in the racing industry, that maybe perhaps were not fast enough, not tall enough, strong enough, or perhaps they got an injury. And they've been slaughtered now and exported to mainland Europe for meat, apparently. So it's shocking figures, especially coming from an industry that gets around 70 million a year from government,
Okay, and apart from the reality, according to these figures, that a lot of racehorses and greyhounds in Ireland get sold for food when they are no longer able to run fast, what is your problem in NARA with these sports, Laura?
Well, for example, with racehorsing, it's the same with greyhound racing, but these animals are basically profit-making machines. They're bred for the purpose to be used to make money. They're for entertainment, they're for sport, and we're opposed to the use of any animal against their will. So for racehorses, they're not seen as the beautiful, intelligent, emotional animals they are. They're seen as a means to make money. And if they're not good anymore, if they're not fast enough, if they get an injury, they're discarded like a piece of trash, and then a new horse is brought in to replace them. They're not seen as the sentient, beautiful creatures that they are. And we want horse racing and greyhound racing to be banned. And I don't think people, especially when it comes to horse racing, understand the horrors behind the industry, or understand that these animals are more than just something to make money out of.
What would you say to the argument that, like, there are probably a lot of people involved in the industry, like children, for example, like who have horses that do racing? There are probably a lot of people involved with the industry who do love the horses and greyhounds. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that definitely that is, accurate, that a lot would love their greyhounds or their horses, but you have to also remember that you can't love anyone if you're just using them, not fully. Even if people take care of their welfare needs and their food, their water, their shelter, their mental stimulation, horses do not want to be ridden. Just like greyhounds, most of the time, if you ever had a companion greyhound, they sleep most of the time. They don't want to be charging around all the time, 24/7. So for us, if you love your animals, let them be, let them decide what they want to do. And don't necessarily assume that just because you take good care of them, that they want to be ridden or raced or used in, say, eventing or show jumping, for example.
And I believe that horse racing, even maybe more so than greyhound racing, like they're actually dangerous sports. Like when the races are actually on, there are like it does happen that there are accidents and horses break their necks or they die in some way during the races, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. Over the past 10 years, I think around 1,100 horses in Ireland have been killed during a race of some kind. And a lot of the time it would be heart attacks. It would be like that, breaking their necks, going over jumps that are too high. These are not natural activities for horses. They would not naturally be jumping over things that of that height. And, let's not forget that they're whipped throughout the whole thing as well. So these horses are running as faster than they normally ever would want to, even in the wild, and this is why they have heart attacks. And of course, that's not even getting into the amount of scandal that has come out about performance-enhancing illegal drugs that have been given to both racehorses and greyhounds for the purposes of enhancing their performance, making them go faster, and this is why they have heart attacks too. So it's neither are nice industries, neither are fair to the animals, and horses wouldn't naturally be doing these things. So it's not right, it's not natural, it's not okay. And greyhound racing and horse racing needs to be banned, and it can't be put forward as some far-fetched idea. We have to be realistically reevaluating our relationship with these animals and these so-called sports and why we're still doing them.
It's mad. I'm in my early 40s, and while I've always loved animals, it's only in the last couple of years that it's really registered with me how dangerous for a lot of animal sports like horse racing and greyhound racing are. Okay, Laura, have yourselves and NARA noticed much of a change in attitude amongst the public to horse racing and greyhound racing over the last couple or few years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been campaigning for the best part of 20 years now. And initially, whenever we talk about the likes of banning greyhound racing or horse racing or objecting to it, at the beginning, people would laugh and not take notice. We're now, especially due to that investigation, the primetime investigation on greyhound racing, for example, and the panorama investigation on horse racing, a lot of people are now reflecting on the industry. And I do think, especially greyhound racing, is quite in the decline at the moment. And if you look at horse racing too, does it really need to be propped up that much that they get around 70, 80 million a year from governments? If the government were not funding these industries, would they exist? Would the public still be funding them out of their own pocket? Would they be getting the support? I don't think so. I think the government keeps both industries going, and I've definitely seen a shift, particularly in the last 5 years or so. I've seen a big shift in public opinion on both, and I hope both are now subject to a fast decline. But we need the government to stop propping them up. That's the main thing.
Okay, I won't keep it much longer, Laura. I read, and you just kind of referred to this in general a second ago, I read in last week's edition of the Future Crunch e-newsletter that the situation regarding greyhound racing in the United States over the last few decades has almost totally changed. Can you tell our listeners as to what happened there over the decades?
Well, in the US, I think most states have banned greyhound racing, as far as I'm aware. And that's had a bit of a knock-on effect in the UK. In the UK, a lot of greyhound stadiums are closing down. There's more public support against these industries. And I think, we need to start looking into legislation to get greyhound racing banned. And that was actually attempted by Deputy Holly Kearns of the Social Democrats about a year or so ago to stop the funding. And, okay, the bill failed, but I think we're going to get there eventually. And if they can be banning them in states in the US and shutting down tracks in the UK, why can't we do it here?
Okay, I don't know about you, but I don't think, I'm not very optimistic that it's likely that horse racing and greyhound racing are going to be banned in Ireland anytime soon. This is what yourselves and NARA are calling for, isn't it? These sports to be banned, or at least for the subsidies to be taken away, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would be hopeful that we'd see a ban on greyhound racing at least in the next 5 years, but I would believe firmly that it will depend on the government withdrawing these grants, because if they didn't have the grants, the public certainly isn't funding them enough to keep them open. So if we target the grants, and I encourage everybody to contact your TDs and ask them not to vote in support of these subsidies the next time it comes round in the budget. But if these subsidies were removed, I definitely feel that we'd have a quicker ban on both industries. But for now, we just need to keep lobbying.
And even in Ireland, is it a case that greyhound racing's gone down hugely in popularity over the years, or is it still kind of like go on, yeah?
Yeah, the attendance rating has plummeted dramatically, and that's not even just since COVID. It's before COVID. Numbers have hugely decreased, particularly in the likes of Shelbourne Park, Greyhound Stadium in Dublin, and a couple of the smaller greyhound tracks around the country, like Lifford, closed down. So did another one in Wexford during COVID, and again, they have to be propped up by the government to reopen. But no, the interest is dramatically dropped and reduced, and it's definitely been on the decline at least for the last 5 years.
And like, am I right in saying the horse racing, the figures haven't gone down as much? Well, I think I don't know much about horse racing as regards people involved in it, but like you think of horse race, you think of Cheltenham and the kind of big race days and stuff, but horse racing, even still, it gets subsidies. I think you have said 70 or 80 million in Ireland a year, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And the figures for horse racing, unfortunately, have not gone down anywhere near as much as greyhound racing has. It's, and I often think as well, they make kind of like the likes of Cheltenham more about their own sort of kind of pomp and ceremony, and dressing up and having prizes and competitions, and it's basically made a bigger event than just singularly horse racing. And I think if you were to take all the glitz and glamour away from Cheltenham, then you'd see a big decline. I think these big racing festivals attract more people, not so much for the horses, but for everything else. So if we were to take that away, I think it would help a lot.
And we're talking about Cheltenham there, I brought it up actually, but in Ireland I think the big one is the Galway races, is it?
It is, and there's also the Punchestown Festival. There's a couple of bigger ones, and like that they'd have a lot of glitz and glamour at them, which attracts more people and celebrities to attend. And very little of that would be about wanting to put a bet on a horse. So if we stop making a big parade out of it, I think that would dramatically reduce the attendance rating and the popularity. And if we keep publishing these documentaries like the Panorama one, I think that's an eye-opener for people as well. But I definitely feel that your average person in Ireland do not think that these industries are acceptable anymore. And I definitely believe we're going to see a big difference in greyhound racing. Within the next 5 years, I would hope we'd see a ban. And then I'd probably say in the next 10 years, we might see even significant steps towards a ban for horse racing.